They called it a denial, just a form letter, just another no. But for Amanda Bennett, it was more than a decision. It was a door slammed in the face of a promise. Out in the quiet plains of Montana, far from the buzz of headlines or policy halls, a grandmother sat alone in her farmhouse, staring at the words that told her Elijah didn't qualify. Not eligible, not approved. But she didn't stop. Amanda had already buried a son in uniform. She had already stood in silence as a folded flag was placed in her trembling hands. What she couldn't do, what she wouldn't do, was let his only child disappear into a system that refused to see him. At 67, Amanda didn't wear armor, but she fought like a soldier, for a boy who rarely spoke but saw the world through engine parts and blueprints, for a promise whispered by her dying son, one that still echoed every morning as she touched the glass case holding his flag. And just when her hope was fraying, just when the silence seemed too loud to bear, a black SUV cut through the Montana rain. A man in uniform stepped out, removed his hat, and looked her in the eye. "Mrs. Bennett," he said quietly, "I'm here to make it right. This isn't just a story about paperwork and red tape. This is the story of what happens when a mother's love becomes unstoppable, when a quiet boy finds a place built for his brilliance, and when one act of courage sparks a legacy no system can ignore. This is Amanda Bennett's story, and it matters. Not eligible, they told her, not approved. But Amanda Bennett didn't give up. Not then, not ever. Inside her modest farmhouse tucked deep in the rolling plains of Montana, surrounded by piles of rejection letters, endless VA documents, and the quiet ticking of a clock that seemed to move slower each day, Amanda kept pushing forward. She did it for Elijah, her grandson, and for the promise her son made with the weight of his last breath. She made phone call after phone call, wrote letters until her hands cramped, drove for hours across the state to government offices where receptionists barely looked up and officials wouldn't meet her eyes. The answer never changed. Always no. Always the same empty refusal dressed up in bureaucratic language. Until one gray, rain-soaked morning when the sound of tires crunching down her gravel driveway broke the silence. A black SUV pulled up and came to a stop. The door opened. A tall man stepped out, older, dressed in full uniform. He didn't say anything right away. He removed his hat and locked eyes with her, not with pity, not with avoidance, but with purpose. "Mrs. Bennett," he said, his voice steady and low, "I'm here to make it right." And in that moment, something shifted. After years of fighting, something finally began to change. Amanda's world was a quiet one. Out there in the open stillness of rural Montana, where the wind whispered through the hayfields and life moved in quiet rhythms, she had built a life shaped by grief but anchored in love. At 67, her days weren't measured by seasons anymore. They were measured by progress reports, phone calls, and the routines of a quiet, special boy named Elijah. He had come to live with her when he was just 5 years old. After the knock on the door that no military family ever wants to hear, Amanda remembered that moment with a vividness that never faded. How the world tilted, how her breath caught, how silence became a permanent fixture in their lives. Her only child, Sergeant Daniel Bennett, had been killed by an IED while leading a convoy near Fallujah. He was just 32, a single father, a soldier who never left for deployment without kissing Elijah's forehead and whispering, "You're my mission now." Those were the last words Amanda ever heard him say, and she had carried them with her every day since. Sometimes she spoke them aloud. Sometimes she simply held them in her chest, like a mantra, especially on the hardest mornings. Before she even made her first cup of coffee, she had a ritual. She would walk to the mantel in the living room and gently lay her hand on the triangular case that held Daniel's flag. Beside it sat his dog tags, a time-worn photograph of him smiling in uniform, and the leather-bound journal he had started writing in after Elijah was born. She read from it often, not only to remember Daniel, but to stay close to the conviction in his words. "If anything happens to me," one entry said, "promise me you'll fight for him. I can't be there, but I need to know he'll be seen." And so Amanda fought. Her house was quiet, her days simple, but they were anything but idle. Elijah, now 19, was tall and gentle, and he moved through the world in his own thoughtful silences. Diagnosed with autism when he was very young, Elijah didn't often make eye contact. He preferred routine over surprises, stillness over noise. But inside him lived a rare spark, a fascination with machines that no one could miss. He could take apart a radio and fix it like it was nothing. He rebuilt an old tractor's starter just by watching videos online. And he would spend hours sketching the inner workings of airplane engines, aircraft he had never flown in, but seemed to understand intuitively. His dream, though he rarely said it aloud, was to work with airplanes, maybe even build one from the ground up someday. Amanda had found a program for him, a specialized track at a technical college in Montana designed specifically for neurodivergent students. A place where someone like Elijah wouldn't just be accommodated, he could actually thrive. The program was approved by the VA. It should have been covered by the GI Bill Daniel earned with years of service. But because the specific track for autistic students wasn't listed separately in the VA database, the answer came back cold and familiar, not eligible. Amanda had heard those words so many times they echoed through her sleep. Still, she rose every morning with a singular goal: to get Elijah into that program. Because this wasn't about policies or paperwork. It was about a promise, one that had lived in her heart since the day her son was buried. Out there in the quiet, vast landscape of Montana, Amanda Bennett began a battle that few people could see. But to her, it was the most important fight of her life. Amanda had always believed that if you followed the rules, came prepared, and treated people with dignity, they would listen. That's how she was raised. But inside the VA's walls, courtesy was often met with blank stares. Diligence didn't guarantee progress. Her file grew thicker. The hold times grew longer. Still, she pressed on. After countless sleepless nights and mountains of research, she submitted the paperwork to have her late son's GI Bill benefits officially transferred to Elijah. It was supposed to be a straightforward process. The college in Billings, Montana had. Amanda Bennett had always known that her grandson Elijah experienced the world through a different lens. He rarely spoke, avoided eye contact, and had a quiet hum that surfaced whenever the world became too much. Sudden noises made him flinch. But Amanda didn't need explanations. She learned to read the subtle shifts in his expressions, the way his eyes lit up whenever a plane soared overhead. That spark in his gaze told her everything she needed to know. This was what moved him. This was where he came alive. So when a specialized neurodivergent learning program launched, one tailored for young adults like Elijah, those on the autism spectrum who flourished with structure, visual aids, and hands-on experience, Amanda saw a door open where there had only been walls. The program offered something rare: understanding, opportunity, and a path forward. Amanda toured the classrooms herself. She shook hands with the instructors, sat in the learning spaces, watched the simulations. But it was seeing Elijah's face that confirmed it. The way his smile unfolded when he saw the aircraft engine mock-up in the lab. It wasn't just joy, it was recognition. Like something inside him said, "This is where I belong." He hadn't smiled like that in years. With renewed purpose, Amanda began the application process through the VAM. She filled out the forms meticulously, attached every necessary document, and submitted it all. And then, nothing. The paperwork disappeared into a void. Weeks passed with no response. She waited, hoped, and finally picked up the phone. The VA hotline held her hostage for an hour, only to shuffle her through a chain of transfers before dropping the line altogether. She tried again, follow-up emails, rechecking every file, highlighting the specific clause in the GI Bill that covered alternative education programs like this one. Still silence. Determined, Amanda got in her car and drove 2 hours to the regional VA office. She walked in carrying a thick manila folder, bursting with neatly arranged paperwork, so much that it resembled a legal case file. She sat down across from a young man in a button shirt and tightly knotted tie, his face too fresh to recall the weight of the Iraq War. He flipped through her documents slowly, mechanically, like someone checking boxes, not helping a family. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said without looking her in the eye. "This program isn't currently approved. You'll need to file a supplemental request." Amanda's hands stayed still in her lap, clenched tightly. "I've already submitted 2 of those," she said. The man gave a familiar nod, the kind you give when you have heard it all before. "The system can take a while to catch up." And so she came back, again and again. With each visit, she brought more. New letters from Elijah's doctors, endorsements from the college's disability services director, personal appeals. Even a handwritten note from Elijah himself, carefully block printed, "I want to go to school here. Please help me." But it was as if no one saw it. No one read it. By the third visit, nothing had changed. Amanda walked back to her car, sat in the driver's seat, and stared at the steering wheel. Her arms were heavy. Her chest ached, not from grief alone, but from exhaustion. She felt like a soldier returning from a battle with nothing but bruises and a hollow ache that wouldn't heal. This wasn't an isolated experience. Families like Amanda's, all across the country, were locked in daily struggles with the labyrinth that is the VA system. The forms alone, 222-1990, 229-895, 214138, sounded more like encrypted military codes than lifelines. The language was distant, the replies soulless, and behind each form was a human being, someone already carrying the burden of grief, trauma, or sacrifice. Amanda once spoke with a Marine widow in Arizona who had waited 16 months to get her son's tuition covered, only to be told the paperwork had expired. A veteran in North Carolina had to prove twice that he was missing a limb before receiving proper disability accommodations. These aren't clerical errors. These are systemic failures, and they take a toll not just on time, but on spirit. For Amanda, every unanswered call felt personal. It wasn't just a denial of access. It was a betrayal of Daniel's memory, her son, Elijah's father. He had died in uniform, trusting that his sacrifice would secure a better future for the child he left behind. What good is a folded flag in a shadow box if the promises it represents aren't honored? So Amanda started keeping a notebook. Not a journal, but a record. A campaign log of sorts. She documented every call, every submission, every moment of silence. Called at 1:10 p.m., transferred twice, no answer. Left message for regional director. No reply. Faxed form 1995 again. Added new cover letter. At night, she would spread out the forms across the dining room table like battle plans. Her hands trembled as she read through them. But she pressed on, because these weren't just pieces of paper. They were trenches. And Amanda knew more deeply than most that some of the hardest battles aren't fought on foreign soil. They're fought in quiet rooms, on crackling phone lines, inside bureaucratic loops that don't care about the cost. You don't fight them with rifles. You fight them with resilience. And Amanda Bennett, widow, mother, grandmother, had plenty of that. Amanda stood in the doorway watching him. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Carly glanced at her and offered a small, knowing nod, as if to say, "We see him. He belongs." Later, they toured the maintenance hangar, where students worked on old aircraft stripped down to their skeletal frames. The air smelled of oil and steel, the kind of scent Amanda had come to associate with possibility. One of the instructors, a broad-shouldered man with a grease-streaked ball cap, waved them over. His name was Tom. He spoke with a natural ease, not forced or performative, just respectful. He addressed Elijah directly, showing him an open engine casing and pointing out its parts. "This one here is a Pratt and Whitney. She's older than me, but still solid," he said with a grin. "Want to take a look?" Elijah's eyes lit up in a way Amanda hadn't seen in years. He didn't speak, but he moved closer, leaning in with a focus so intense it was like watching gears turn in his mind. His fingers hovered over the components, then started tapping, soft, measured, like a metronome syncing with the engine's silent beat. Tom didn't interrupt. He just nodded in appreciation. "You've got a mechanic's hands, kid. I can see that already." Amanda felt her throat tighten, not from sadness, but from the weight of recognition, of being seen. Not just Elijah, but everything she had fought for. Every sleepless night, every letter, every no she refused to accept. It was all here in the way Elijah's hands moved, in the way this place made room for him. As they left the hangar, Elijah reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded diagram, one he had drawn over and over since he was a child. A plane's blueprint in his own style, careful and precise. He held it out to Tom, who took it carefully, studied it, and smiled. "You keep drawing like this," he said, "and fixing like you think. We'll have to make room for you around here." Elijah nodded once, just once, but that was enough. That evening, back at the motel, Amanda sat at the small desk by the window, her laptop open in front of her. She pulled out the binder labeled Daniel's Promise and placed it beside her. She didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, she started writing again. This time not to appeal or to plead or to justify, but to thank, to affirm, to say, "You gave my son a place to begin." Elijah lay on the bed behind her, his headphones on, gently tapping out a rhythm on his chest. Something steady, something sure, like a compass, always pointing him home. Her shoulders dipped just slightly, an almost imperceptible shift, but Amanda saw it. She caught the way Carly's eyes began to mist, the emotion barely held back. "This place was designed with a students like him in mind," Carly said gently. Then she paused. Her honesty came through without apology. "But I'll be real with you. We're still fighting every day to secure federal funding for programs like this. Most of them wouldn't even exist without private grants or donations. Special needs education, especially at the post-secondary level, it's just not something Washington cares much about." Amanda nodded, her movements slow, her mind absorbing each word like drops of water on parched ground. That was it, wasn't it? That was the core of the struggle. Elijah wasn't invisible by nature. He existed fully, vibrantly, but within a system that simply refused to see him. Still here, in this quiet space, something felt undeniably different. It wasn't just the gentle lighting or the careful design of the rooms. It was the intention. Someone had thought about kids like Elijah, had built with them in mind, and that changed everything. By the time they left the building, Elijah had found his way into the tech lab, his fingers gliding over the smooth surface of a model airplane. His face remained mostly still, but a soft smile touched his lips, a flicker of joy, of interest, of possibility. Amanda locked that moment deep inside her heart like a keepsake, something sacred. For the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel like a beggar collecting crumbs. She didn't feel like she had to plead her son's worth. For once, it felt like they might actually belong. The letter came on a dull Wednesday afternoon, stuffed inside a lifeless government-issued envelope. Bland on the outside, but inside it carried a weight that could crush a person's spirit. Amanda recognized it the second she saw it. The paper was stiff, overly formal. The seal was pressed like a stamp of indifference. And the language, cold, polite, wrapped in bureaucracy, tried to dress disappointment in professionalism. She opened it there at the kitchen table. Her hands were already trembling. She didn't need to read all the way through. The words were so familiar by now, they practically read themselves. "Dear Mrs. Bennett, thank you for your continued interest. At this time, the requested program is not yet approved for GI Bill transfer eligibility." Amanda didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. It was the fourth rejection in just 6 months. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. No outburst. No breakdown. Just a quiet, controlled breath. Then she folded the letter with the same care one might use to fold a flag, placed it inside the Daniel's Promise binder, right beside the other 3, and rose from her chair. The sun was starting to dip behind the snow-covered pines outside, casting soft golden light across the hardwood floor. Amanda moved toward the fireplace, kneeling to start a fire, just the way Daniel used to whenever he was home on leave. The scent of pine wood soon filled the room, warm and comforting. Then she reached for the journal. Daniel had begun writing it after Elijah was born. It was old now, full of smudges and grease marks, his handwriting looping unevenly across the pages. There were field notes scribbled beside quick sketches of Elijah's first toy helicopter. Pages filled with love, frustration, wonder, fear. Amanda flipped through until she reached the one she always stopped at, the entry he had written just days before his final deployment to Iraq. "If anything happens to me, promise me he won't be invisible." That sentence stared back at her, unwavering. It didn't read like a simple hope. It was a mission, a demand, a father's final command. And it hit Amanda like a bolt straight to the core. She sat there for a long time, the fire crackling quietly beside her, while Elijah hummed in the next room, soft, steady, rearranging a neat row of tiny model engines on the coffee table. That familiar rhythm of his brought comfort, but it also brought resolve. Amanda stood. She walked over to her old laptop, the edges worn, the screen a little dim. And with fingers that trembled but a heart steady and strong, she began to type. "To whom it may concern, my name is Amanda Bennett. I am the mother of Sergeant Daniel Bennett, who was killed in Iraq. I am also the grandmother and legal guardian of his son, Elijah, a brilliant, autistic young man who dreams of studying aircraft mechanics. We've been denied GI Bill benefits 4 times because the program that best supports his needs isn't yet on an approved list. Daniel gave everything for this country. His last wish was that his son wouldn't be forgotten, that he wouldn't be left behind simply because he doesn't fit the usual mold. I'm writing this letter because I don't know where else to turn. I still believe, deep down, that someone, somewhere is listening. Please help us. Help him. Respectfully, Amanda Bennett. But she didn't stop there. Amanda dug through an old notebook Daniel had kept tucked away in the back of his closet. It was filled with scribbled notes, partial addresses, unit codes, call signs, names half remembered. One stood out, General Marcus Hale. Daniel had once described him as the kind of leader who still gave a damn. Amanda added his name and email to her message list. And then, still trembling, still unsure but utterly determined, she pressed send. And for the first time in months, the silence that had surrounded them didn't feel so heavy, didn't feel so final. That evening, as thunder rumbled low and steady over the Montana hills, echoing like distant artillery, Amanda Bennett sat in her living room beside a glowing fire and believed, just for a moment, that someone might finally hear them. The past hung thick in the air. Rain splashed hard against the kitchen windows, erratic and restless, mirroring the turmoil in Amanda Bennett's chest. She stood at the sink, drying a plate in slow, steady circles, her hands moving as if guided by muscle memory rather than thought. Outside, a pair of headlights sliced through the downpour and flashed across the living room wall. She froze. Visitors didn't come around in weather like this, especially not in a black SUV with tinted windows, rolling quietly up the gravel road like a shadow uninvited. On the living room floor, Elijah sat cross-legged, his attention locked on the disassembled pieces of a small engine toy he was determined to rebuild. The child was oblivious to the shift in energy in the room, untouched by the sudden weight pressing on his mother's shoulders. Amanda took a breath and moved toward the front door. Her eyes squinted through the rain. A tall figure stepped out of the SUV. Even through the sheets of water, she could make out the distinct lines of a military coat and the posture of a man who had carried command through war zones and funerals alike. His movements were deliberate, steady, marked with the patience of someone who had learned that every second counts and yet knows when to wait. She opened the door slowly. The wind whipped around her as rain followed the man inside like a ghost. He removed his hat and tucked it neatly under one arm. His presence was calm, unwavering. "Mrs. Bennett?" he asked, his voice low and even. "I'm General Marcus Hale. I received your email." Amanda blinked, her mouth parted, but no words came. She stepped aside, barely noticing the way her fingers trembled as she motioned him inside. The warmth from the fire reached out to them as they crossed into the living room. General Hale paused near the mantel. His gaze scanned the photographs without needing explanation. Daniel in uniform, Elijah on his father's shoulders, the folded flag sealed in a glass case. He gave a small nod, a gesture of recognition, of reverence. Amanda gestured toward the kitchen table. "Please, have a seat," she said, though her voice was thin, nearly threadbare. He sat with a kind of grounded composure, the kind that doesn't shift easily. Across from him, Amanda lowered herself into the chair, twisting the corner of a paper napkin between her fingers. Then slowly, she began to speak. She told him everything. About Elijah, about Daniel, about the promise Daniel made before deployment, the college plans, the future they were trying to build, the fight with the VA that seemed to never end. At first, her voice was quiet, careful. Then it began to gain a rhythm, sharp, tired, and worn from too many battles fought alone. She didn't hold back. Not this time. General Hale said nothing. He didn't interrupt, didn't ask her to repeat anything or produce a single document. He just listened. When her words finally came to a stop, the silence sat between them, deep and full. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a sleek black phone. With a few practiced motions, he scrolled and made a call. "This is General Hale," he said. "Get me the director of program approvals." A pause, then with an edge, "No, I don't care if it's after hours. This cannot wait." Amanda could only stare. caught between disbelief and hope. You're going to approve the Elijah Bennett case effective immediately. No more delays, no more excuses. Another beat. Then consider this an order. He ended the call with quiet finality, pressing his thumb to the screen. Then he looked at Amanda, his eyes steady but softened now. Sometimes, he said, the system forgets who it's supposed to serve. I haven't. In that moment, something inside Amanda shifted. The storm outside still raged, but for the first time in months, the one inside her chest began to still. It happened faster than anyone could have predicted. Just 2 days after General Hale's visit, a letter arrived, not the usual VA envelope, but a crisply printed one delivered by certified mail. Amanda's hands trembled as she opened it. Her eyes swept the lines over and over again. Dear Mrs. Bennett, your request has been reviewed and approved under executive authority. Elijah Bennett's enrollment in the neuroaeronautics program at Billings Technical College is fully authorized under post 9/11 GI Bill coverage, effective immediately. She read it 3 times before allowing herself to believe it. Later that day, the phone rang. It was Carly from the college, her voice shaky with awe and excitement. Amanda, we got the confirmation. The VA called us directly. We've never seen anything like this. There was a brief pause. Then laughter broke through on the other end, disbelief and relief twined together. They didn't just approve the program, Carly said, her voice cracking with emotion. They flagged it for permanent listing on the Federal Registrar. Amanda said nothing at first. She didn't have to. Her fight, quiet, stubborn, relentless, had done more than open the door for her son. It had kicked it off its hinges. Amanda didn't say much. Her lips were still, but her eyes overflowed, swollen with quiet tears that said everything words couldn't. That weekend, she and Elijah drove back to the college, not as visitors, not for another meeting, not to hear another no, but to finally enroll. This time, the campus looked different. Maybe it was the same blue sky, the same paths and buildings, but something had shifted. The air felt gentler, like it no longer pushed back. The sun felt warmer, softer. Or maybe the change was inside Amanda. For the first time in a long time, she could breathe without the weight of resistance pressing against her chest. The weight of red tape, of policies, of silence. They walked through the halls that once felt uncertain, now familiar, alive with movement and chatter. Faculty smiled as they passed. Students lingered in corners, laughing, talking, simply existing. And at the front desk, Carly was waiting. She didn't just greet them. She embraced Amanda in a long, grounding hug, one Amanda hadn't realized she needed until she melted into it. No words, just warmth, just welcome. Inside the tech lab, sunlight spilled through the wide windows, dancing off the tools, the engines, the gleaming machinery and pieces of invention. It was a room humming with energy, with untold potential. Elijah walked slowly, his steps quiet, deliberate. His eyes wandered across the benches, over the turbines, and up to the lights strung above. Then, as though something deep inside him had called, he moved toward an old aircraft frame resting on a service stand in the corner. Weathered but proud, he stepped close and laid his hand on the cold metal. His fingers traced each rivet, the smooth curve of the wing, slow, reverent, like a ceremony. He didn't speak, but Amanda saw it. The change, a smile, subtle at first, lifting only one corner of his mouth. Then it spread, full and bright, a spark of pride and knowing. It wasn't the smile of curiosity, it was something deeper. Ownership, connection, purpose, belonging. In that single quiet moment, Amanda Bennett knew without a doubt that her son's promise hadn't just been honored. It had found breath. It had become real. 1 month later, under a brilliant Montana sky, folding chairs lined the soft grass of the college green. Flags waved lightly in the breeze like silent witnesses. A large white canopy stood at the center, where students, faculty, and veterans gathered. They weren't just attending an event. They were marking a beginning, a birth of something rare, something carved out of heartbreak, perseverance, and love. The neuroaeronautics program, once obscure, a quiet pilot project tucked in the shadows, now bore a new name, the Daniel Bennett Initiative. Amanda stood near the front row. In her arms, she held a framed photo of her son in full uniform. His face was steady, his eyes locked in quiet resolve. His strength, his calm, she could feel them pulsing in her chest like a second heartbeat. Beside her, Elijah stood tall in a navy button-down and khakis. His hands fidgeted gently with the corners of the program pamphlet, but his face was calm, his shoulders easy. The tension he used to carry had lifted. The college director stepped forward to the mic first. Her voice was steady, but the emotion in it was unmistakable. Today, she began, we're not just launching a new academic program. We're recognizing something more. We honor a family's unbreakable resolve. We acknowledge a mother's relentless fight, a veteran's sacrifice, and a young man's incredible future. But most of all, we affirm this. No one who serves should ever be made invisible in the very system they protected. The next speaker, the Director of Veteran Affairs, had flown in specifically for the occasion. Her words landed like truth delivered with quiet thunder. This initiative, she said, is proof that bureaucracy doesn't always win. That when people speak up loudly, persistently, and with purpose, we don't just listen, we respond, we change. And finally, General Hale stepped up, his presence commanding. His uniform was crisp, the silver stars on his shoulders catching the midday light. He didn't look at a script. He didn't need one. His voice was measured and powerful. This, he said, is about promises kept across generations. Daniel Bennett made his promise to this country. Amanda Bennett kept her promise to her son. And today we make a promise to Elijah that he will be seen, that he will be supported, that he will soar. Amanda felt the tears begin to fall again, but this time she didn't wipe them away. She reached for Elijah's hand and held Daniel's photo a little closer to her chest. Around her, applause erupted. Voices and hands clapped in rhythm, not just for a speech, but for something sacred, recognition, gratitude, change. And Amanda knew with a calm that reached deep into her bones, something had shifted, not just for her family, but far beyond. This wasn't the end of a battle. It was the beginning of a legacy. Long after the folding chairs were taken down, long after the clapping faded into memory, Amanda's fight lived on. In the echo of that program's name, in whispered stories across small-town kitchens, in veterans' families who might never meet her but felt her impact. Because this wasn't only about one form finally approved, one student finally admitted. This was about what happens when ordinary people refuse to disappear. When someone tired and hurting still chooses to show up. Again and again, Amanda never thought of herself as brave. She didn't seek headlines or spotlights. But resilience is often quiet. It lives in the unnoticed actions. Letters mailed, calls made, forms filled out, redone, resubmitted. Not once, but over and over. Despite the walls, despite the weight, that kind of persistence doesn't go viral, but it changes lives. And Amanda Bennett's story had done just that. She wasn't alone. The delay she faced was not some isolated misfortune. A 2024 report from the VA's Office of Inspector General revealed that more than 28% of GI Bill claims involving dependents were stalled due to bureaucratic errors and misclassifications. And in that statistic, buried beneath the percentages and paperwork, were thousands of real families, widows clinging to promises, single parents counting every dollar, caregivers waiting on benefits already earned by the ones they loved and lost. Amanda Bennett refused to accept the silence. She couldn't. Instead, she took her frustration and shaped it into purpose. She began writing, submitting letters to local newspapers, pouring out her experience not for applause or sympathy, but as a map, a guide for others navigating the same confusing and painful terrain. Her first op-ed, Paperwork Shouldn't Bury a Promise, appeared in the Billings Gazette. Before long, 3 other regional publications picked it up. And soon after, something unexpected happened. Her inbox started filling. Messages came in from across the country, from voices that had also been waiting, from hearts caught in the same kind of limbo. Your words gave me the courage to start again. I thought I was the only one. Amanda read every message. Slowly, she began compiling resources, hotlines, contacts, VA navigation tools, anything that could shorten someone else's path through the mess. Her guide took shape not as a policy paper, but as a lifeline. Practical, personal, and rooted in hard-earned knowledge. She didn't do it alone. Carly, her longtime friend, stood beside her every step of the way, and General Hale, stern, sharp, but deeply human, joined their efforts to push for change. Together, they advocated for small but meaningful shifts in legislation, nudging the system to better support modern, non-traditional programs and learning paths. It wasn't glamorous. It was slow, procedural, and often frustrating. But Amanda understood something many don't. Heroism isn't always loud. It's not medals, not speeches, not parades. It's not giving up. It's refusing to let broken systems erase someone's worth. It's keeping a promise made in the quiet moments, the hardest kind to keep. Her work became a quiet signal for others, especially those too exhausted to keep fighting, those who had nearly disappeared in the shuffle. And somehow, against all odds, the system began to shift. Not because it was perfect, but because enough people had finally been heard. That afternoon, as the spring sun poured gold across the college campus, Amanda stood silently outside a classroom window. Her hands folded softly in front of her. She watched without needing to be seen. Inside, Elijah sat at a workbench, surrounded by 3 other students. His focus was steady, his hands skilled and sure, as he carefully pieced together the core of a small aircraft engine. Amanda couldn't hear their conversation, only the sound of laughter, genuine and light. The kind of laughter that meant ease, comfort. The kind of laughter that comes when someone feels safe, when they feel like they belong. She leaned in just slightly, caught off guard by the sudden tightness in her chest as Elijah turned and smiled. Not a polite smile, not a rare one, a true open expression of connection. He smiled at a classmate like someone who knew he was exactly where he needed to be. The American flag above the building flapped gently in the wind, casting a faint striped shadow across the brick. That shadow reached all the way down the wall, tracing toward the classroom where her son now thrived. Amanda placed her hand over her heart, not in salute, not for ceremony, but for something quieter, something deeply felt. "You kept your word, Daniel," she whispered, "and I kept mine." Her voice didn't shake. It wasn't sad. It was whole. She gave the room one last look, took in the life blooming behind that window. Hard-fought, tender, and so real. Then she stepped away. Behind her, Elijah laughed again, not out of politeness, not to fill silence, but simply because he could, because in that moment, he was where he was meant to be. And that was enough. Fade out. In a world racing forward, where speed is often valued more than care, Amanda Bennett's journey reminds us of something timeless. Promises still matter, especially the quiet ones. Made late at night across kitchen tables, whispered between generations, scribbled into the margins of journals no one else will ever read. Her fight wasn't just about her son. It wasn't just about college funding. It was about a system that too often forgets the people it's supposed to serve. It was about how persistence, stubborn, gentle, constant, can carve paths through the most unyielding walls. Not always for us, but for those who come after. This story resonates with a truth familiar to many, especially older Americans who've seen the slow arc of change, who fought for it, and know that nothing worth having ever comes easy. Whether you're a veteran, a caregiver, a parent, or simply someone who's felt invisible in a tangle of red tape, this was for you. And still, today, families like Amanda's wait, trapped in loops of outdated policy, endless forms, and hours spent on hold. But maybe, just maybe your story, your voice, your courage might shift something too. Because sometimes all it takes is one person who refuses to be quiet. She never backed down. Not once. Now, we want to hear your voice. Has there ever been a time in your life or in the life of someone you love when you had to fight a quiet, invisible battle like Amanda's? One that no one really saw, but that changed everything? Do you believe we're truly honoring the commitments we made to the families of those who served? Do today's actions match yesterday's promises? Share your thoughts in the comments. Speak your truth, because this conversation matters. And if Amanda's story stirred something in you, if it reminded you of a loved one, helped you feel less alone, or simply gave you a moment of hope, please consider showing your support. Like the video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. We're here to tell the real stories. The ones that don't always make the headlines but carry deep meaning. Stories that honor the sacrifices, the resilience, and the quiet, powerful courage of everyday Americans. Thank you for walking this path with us. And never forget, some of life's greatest victories don't come with fanfare or your parades. Sometimes they come in the form of one determined person who just refuses to give up. Until we meet again, stay kind, stay strong, and most of all, stay grateful.